Welcome to the Wellness as a Way of Life podcast, your one-stop, all-encompassing source of wellness, knowledge, wisdom, inspiration, and motivation. Here we teach you why not all wellness trends are for you, how to figure out which ones are, how to best adapt them for your personal wellness toolbox, and how ultimately to integrate your wellness practices so fully that they become to feel like brushing your teeth. A foundational part of who you are and not a check mark on your to-do list. Today on the podcast, I'm just so thrilled to share my conversation with a friend of mine and colleague, Barbara. She teaches women in leadership to manage change, develop their leadership capacity, and build highly effective teams so that they can show up authentically as leaders while running high-impact organizations. She is a former educator, current university professor, and holds a doctorate in organizational leadership. From managing multi-million-dollar budgets to leading teams of 2 to 200, she has always understood that highly effective teams led by bold leadership are the foundation to the future success of any organization. So excited for this conversation. It's a good one. So let's dive right in. At the end, I'll tell you about a really incredible program that we are spearheading together. So excited. Here we go. Hi, Barbara. Thank you so much for being here today on the podcast. We're so thrilled to have you. I'm excited to pick your brain a little bit about all things leadership. So let's start with, how are you? Tell us a little something about your morning so far.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for having me and for, just including me in this larger conversation with your community. Morning is going great so far. Had a solid coffee and actually had time to do a little morning meditation and journaling, which since becoming a mom has been something that has gone onto the back burner, and I'm layering it in throughout the day. But I'm like, okay, I took my vitamins. I know this is a wellness podcast, so this is important that I start off well. So got all my vitamins, did a little morning meditation and a mini journaling. So good. Solid morning.
Amazing. You're glowing. So it worked.
Thank you.
I'd love to have a conversation about, one thing I focus a lot here in terms of optimal wellness leading to having an improved sense of confidence, and really from that confidence coming from a deeper place, and the relationship between those things and self-care. And I wanted to sort of expand that conversation to your expertise, which is leadership, and talk about something that you had mentioned to me the other day about it really being misunderstood what leadership is, and sort of where the confidence to be a leader comes from, and what essentially someone can practice, opposed to it being this innate thing that you either have or you don't have. So pull on any of those threads and let's start the conversation.
Yeah, I love that you're talking about how deeply connected leadership work is connected to wellness, because I think that my journey in leadership started a lot with how it may begin for others is somebody sees something in you, they tap your potential for a role or a position, and it's you're almost slotting somebody into somewhere else. But what is unseen is the actual leadership work that is so deeply connected to your identity. And because it's so deeply connected to your identity and who you are and how you show up, it really does take a toll on, your physical well-being, your mental well-being. And as I was stepping into a formal leadership role myself, it took a huge toll on my mental health. And it was not so much because of the role itself, but it's because how I was experiencing it and how I was understanding it, and how I was I have to show up as this person, and I have to do this, and now I have to do all of these other things. And working with a leadership coach really saved me, because I was able to see the gaps in what I wasn't seeing, but also they were able to affirm who I actually was as a person. And I think coming back to who you are and what you stand for constantly and consistently is really what kept me afloat, and really said no, it's not what all of these other people are thinking about me. It's not getting caught up in the mess that can be it. So without getting too far into it, I know that we'll talk more. I feel like my journey into leadership was very deeply connected with my wellness, my mental well-being, my physical well-being, and it definitely took a toll. And coming back to a space where I feel really confident and really good has been because I have a solid sense on who I am as a leader, how I want to show up, and what is like a non-negotiable, but also what is not something that I want to focus on, and what I'll, kind of let go and not have a sense of control over.
Yeah. So I'm curious, now that you kind of planted the seed, if it makes sense to you, the framework, because I'm always talking about how there's no one size fits all wellness. It's really important that you find things that align with your stage in life, all these factors, and also like, what are you doing? How are you conducting? What is your lifestyle? Mm-hmm. Do you think there's some of that choose your own adventure as well in the leadership space in terms of what you're going to focus on?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there has to be a deep connection with your lifestyle, who you are as a person, how you're evolving, and also understanding that like as life changes, the way that you show up as a leader is also going to change. And like that's okay. I think that starting in my leadership journey, I was like wellness wise, I was making sure that I was in the gym in the morning. Like I would do that. I would prep all my meals. Like it was a lot. But I also had this sense of order in my life. What I was able to unpack since then is like, is it the fact that it's healthy for me to go to the gym and, prep my meals and do all of these things and work with a health coach? Or is it the fact that I was seeking a sense of control? And I could have it was 5 a.m. and I was in the gym, and like, it wasn't that I felt good. It's just that I was going. And I think that now I'm at a space where I'm doing things that actually feel good for me. Slow mornings, meditation, starting to dabble in other things that are like good for my body. And I think that I'm in a really good place when my wellness is good all around. I'm able to quote unquote, like perform as a leader, and I feel good about it. I can show up for the people that I'm leading. I can think, I can be creative. I can, engage in the work that I want to. And I think that those are things like when I'm talking about control, when I'm thinking about like people pleasing habits like that, those are really things that drove me early on, but I wasn't able to name it as a leader. And it took a toll on like my physical, my mental health, and unpacking what drives you as a leader versus what is limiting you. If you are able to be so self-aware that you understand what's limiting you, you're able to either one, choose if you want to develop that, or choose if you're like, that's actually something that I don't want to work on. Right. And like, that's not who I want to be as a leader. So I think learning to let go of some of those things is really something that I was able to work on. And the better that I am physically, mentally, emotionally, the better that I am as a leader. And I think that that's one thing that is different for new founders. We see this huge surge of I work with women primarily, of women, but women and men starting companies. They're shifting from their area of expertise, and now they're creating a business around that, which is beautiful and phenomenal. But the one thing that isn't talked about is, say you're a marketing expert and now you start a marketing agency. You're not necessarily that marketing expert. You now become the leader, CEO, and founder of that company, in addition to being this marketing expert. And that shift in identity is huge for people. Like that is a huge jump that is not talked about enough. And also there isn't like support in place for it, because it's a huge, yes, like work shift, but there's a huge identity shift there that's happening. And it's not even like the multiple hats you wear. It's like the multiple identities that you wear, the different voices that you have to show up as, the different things that you have to consider, and making sure that you are good mentally, emotionally, spiritually is the one thing that I think makes a successful leader.
Yeah. Well, I love that you kind of draw the parallel there, because I talk about it a lot of, essentially being in a good state or an optimal state of health and wellness involves a lot of self-leadership, right? A lot of the same skills. And I think what you're saying is, well, first, I'd love for you to define terms, because I know you don't define leadership the way that most of us might think of the definition.
Yeah. I say a lot that leadership is, and we talked about at the beginning, it is something that is your ability to do things. So strong leaders and leadership as we know it is bullshit. Like this is this idea that we're just going to promote and we're going to, step into this role of CEO is what I like to deconstruct and say it's more than just the role. It's more than just like the title. It's the work that you are willing to do to show up as the person that you say you want to do. So leadership, by definition, if we Google it right now, it would be something along the lines of a person or a group's ability to impact change or impact a movement or like shift something or lead something. And the part that goes unsaid so many times in these definitions or in this like traditional space is that leadership requires deep vulnerability. It requires self-reflection. It requires authenticity in a way that you've never seen or experienced it before. And it pushes you to really, as the leader, to really be and sit in change and feeling uncomfortable a lot. And if, what you see is strong leaders are able to work with somebody, with either a coach, a team, a consultant, somebody that you're working through all of those phases and you continue to go through. Versus what you see in ineffective leadership, it doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just you hit your first level of change, you hit your first like era of growth, and you revert back to what's comfortable because you don't have those at-bats in to say, this is normal. This is everyday life. Every day is going to be different as a leader. And how do you persist through that versus revert back and kind of stay in this cycle, in this unhealthy cycle of, comparison, saying this is where I want to be, but I don't know how to get there, or it's just not for me. And I don't believe that. I believe that everybody can be a leader. I believe that, with work and with the right support and with the right teaming, people can succeed. It really just requires to sit in what's uncomfortable a lot of times. And it's uncomfortable because it's so deeply connected and tied to who you are as a person and your identity.
How do you think about sort of the ebb and flow of the importance of being vulnerable and self-aware and authentic and establishing clear boundaries?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that I was actually just talking about this with somebody 2 days ago, and like, what does authenticity mean? Like, I feel like in the online space, you're like, let's do a day in the life. Let's
very trendy. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very trendy. It's very trendy. And it gets lost in, where like, it's actually showing up as fake. Like people are trying to be authentic and it ends up showing up as disingenuous and fake, because you're just copying what other people are doing. And I think what's missing there is a leadership voice. So when you're showing up and thinking about your leadership voice, it's deeply, deeply connected to why you're doing this work, your core values, how your core values align with your business core values. It's clear and it's succinct. And in that space, when you tie all those things together and there are messages that you want to share about yourself, about who you are, about why you do this work that align to those core values, then that makes sense to share with your community. But it's not that you're hiding things. It's that you're sharing so much that it's now messy and it's unclear. And now people are confused. And I think that that is really the role of a leader, especially leaders of emerging communities or existing communities, both in person, online, is authenticity is so in sync, or has to be so in sync with your leadership voice, because as a leader, you have to make things clear. There are so many things that are happening. There are so many things that you can talk about, so many things that you can get into. But if you are further confusing your community or further confusing your clients, it's doing a disservice to you as a leader, but also this like beautiful community that you've put so much time into. So I think authenticity and boundaries are key, but also the missing link there is like, why are you sharing this? Are you sharing part of your story to connect with people? Are you highlighting maybe one or two things? And then why are you sharing that? So a lot of the work that I do is changing the ways that that women work as founders, because we're doing these traditional things that you were this hustle and bustle. You're the person that's leading the team in a traditional setting, and you try to do that as a founder, you're going to burn out. So a lot of the things that I do early on with founders is shifting the ways that we work, but that also requires some deep identity work on, why did you have to do all this work? Were you trying to prove yourself? Were you trying to prove that you were, better than the next person and trying to like fight for your job? So there's a lot of identity work to unpack. But I always share with my community, like the connection with, mental health and like my own mental health and stepping into leadership, because that's something that I value. But there are also pieces that I'm choosing not to share, and not just because of boundaries, but because it could be confusing. It can be confusing to people that are looking at this for the first time. And clarity is so key there.
So can you speak a little bit to sort of the different kinds of leaders there might be? Because it occurred to me, like, does every leader have to be an extrovert, for example? Mm-hmm. Are there, quiet, powerful leaders, and just maybe some of the different ways that people can think like, yeah, I guess I am a leader, or maybe I do aspire to be that more than I thought.
Yeah, there's absolutely different styles. There's different ways that we value certain things as leaders versus how we show up as leaders. So I think there's like a mix of things, but I think that thinking about leadership styles is a lot of the work that I do. So are you very action based? Like by the end of this 50 minutes, you have to have something done, or you're really driven by that? Or are you really driven by data? Or are you really driven by socializing and making sure that everybody has a voice? Or do you want to talk things through first and hear everybody in the room before you make a decision? Or some leaders are like, this is the decision and that's that, and we're moving forward from it. I think that it doesn't matter where you fall in that. It doesn't matter what type of leader you are. What matters is that you recognize that you are that type of leader. So the gaps that I see a lot of are not so much you're this type of leader and you're, messing up or you're doing all of these things, but it's you're this type of leader and you actually think that you are listening to people. You think that you're doing all these things. You think that you're socializing ideas. You think that you're collaborating, but actually you're really just ultimately making a decision. You're telling people what to do. And there's a gap between who you think you are and how people are perceiving you. So many times with leaders, it's closing the gap between who you think you are as a leader and who others think you are as a leader. The more that you understand those two deeply is like a game changer when you're working with people. And this can be with clients, with a community, with your team. If there's a gap between, I think I'm collaborating with people versus your team thinks that you are telling them what to do and not listening to them, there's a gap in how you are understanding yourself and how they are understanding you. So it's really about, you can be all types of leaders, and many leaders are different in different settings, but it's really closing the gap in how people are understanding you. And I like to differentiate that it's not people pleasing. It's not overthinking about what people think about you. It's how they're actually perceiving your leadership style and experiencing your leadership style. And the more that we can understand that, the better and the faster that we are able to work with people.
So what I'm hearing you say is that it's less about some sort of hustle bustle, quote unquote, work we need to do to become a better leader, and more about getting more honest with ourselves and humble to understand the disconnect in what we think is happening versus how everyone else perceives what is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, like you started the question around like, is there one particular type of leader? I think as a society, we see in movies and shows, you see one type of leader. You see this like very outspoken personality. Like that's, I think, what society has shown us. This is the leader. This is the corner office CEO. This is what they sound like. They're, throwing papers and yelling at people and doing all of these things. And they're establishing themselves as an authority. And there's this like authority figure attached to being a leader, when in actuality, this is why I say that leadership as we know it is bullshit, is in actuality, that doesn't move people, that scares people. And that doesn't actually drive them to make change. What drives people to change is trust, safety, connection, and all of those things. You actually see those qualities in people that are not as authoritative, or people that maybe don't see themselves as a leader. And pulling those qualities out of somebody and really supporting them to see that, like, yes, you are a leader. You are a leader in your community. You are a leader with the people that you work with. I think is a lot of my work. And it's really working with phenomenal people and being like, yes, you absolutely are a leader. You don't have to be the leader in the movies, the leader in the shows, to actually be a quote unquote leader. You don't have to yell at people to be a leader. You don't have to operate with fear.
Yeah, no, I love that you point that out. So I'm curious because I've had an experience, going into corporations. At this point, they're all pretty small corporations. And, they're all pro, oh yes, let's get more wellness going, all the good intentions. They say all the things, but the one person who doesn't want to participate in the actual practicing of wellness things is the founder, the CEO, the leader, right? And of course, all the good excuses that they have their own XYZ going, but I think it's so important. I mean, particularly but I'm sure it's for you as well. You have to walk the talk, and sort of like the softest form of leadership is just modeling how you want everybody else to show up.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit to sort of this widely misunderstood concept of influence these days?
Yep. And I'm gonna try to verbalize this image that I have in my head, because I know this is a podcast and like you're listening to this in the car or, over breakfast. So there's this image that is ingrained in my head, and it's, 4 people that are pulling a sled. And there's the first image without any words is a person sitting in this like sled. There's like a person sitting in there. There's 4 people that are pulling that. And then the second image is there's nobody in the sled. There's now 5 people that are pulling it, and they are pulling this sled. And the first person in there is said leader. So the shift between those two is, in my mind, are you telling people what to do and just like riding this wave because you like the idea of being a leader? You like the title of being a leader. You like telling people what to do. Or are you in front of everyone and being the first person to be like, we're going to drive this work. I'm excited about this work. This is why we're doing this work. And the most effective leaders are the second one, of course, right? They're the ones that are on the ground level. And every time that I talk about this, it comes off, the first thing that comes to mind when people hear that is, oh, you're like the first to arrive and the last to leave. This like hustle culture of you have to do the absolute most. And I think that that's false. That's a false narrative around leadership, that you have to be this overworker. What you really have to be is the visionary. You have to be able to think creatively. You have to be able to see where your company is going in the next 5-10 years, and not just put your head down and work. Like there is a part of that that is part of leadership. But when you don't see leaders doing the same things as their team members or their staff, it's not so much about morale. Like that's part of it also. Like, okay, this is just for us. It's not for you. Like you're in this high and mighty space. But what happens is that one, it takes away the value from it. If I'm saying this is valuable and I'm not there as a leader, it takes away the value from it. And then also I think the second one, which is overlooked, is like usability. Is there are things that you are probably sharing and taking away in these wellness retreats or meetings or spaces or trainings that we can learn and actually embed into the day-to-day work that we do. And because I'm not in that space, I don't understand it on the ground level. I don't understand how to implement it. I don't understand how it works. And I don't understand how it can actually support the growth and performance of my team. And that is really why you need to be in those spaces. It's not just to, yes, there is a part of it that is public facing and that political frame of I'm going to show face and I'm going to do what we're doing because we said we were going to do it. But the other part of it is this is an investment, whether it's yours or anything else. You need to be in the room to learn how this works so that you can create it and embed it within the larger vision for like sustainability and retention for staff, within your larger vision for how to gauge if like my team is okay, if they're doing okay. How do I know that they're getting to their point of burning out, or how do I support them on their wellness journey? And I think that if you are not on the floor, on the ground level, you just don't understand as a leader how things work. And that's where the real gap is. The public facing part is a small part of it, but I think it's understanding how to implement the new learning, how to implement these new ways. And that all goes back to like how we began the conversation, which is it's change, right? It's change for that leader. You are creating new ways of working. You are, focusing on new areas of wellness. And if that leader is not valuing that and being in that space, it's not so much so that they don't see the value in that, but there's also what's called like an immunity to change. They don't want to change. They're like, this is for you, but not for the whole company. Right. And without bearing the lead too much, those are things that you don't see are able to sustain within like a greater, small, large, mid-sized company. Anything that you don't see the leader taking part in is very hard to roll out or sustain.
Yeah. Okay. Last question for you, Barbara. I wanted to sort of drill down a little bit more on this idea that a good leader has developed their capacity to sit in discomfort. And arguably, like, I think without getting too dark, there's a lot of unknowns in our future. And it's a skill I think most people should be developing. And I personally think taking better care of yourself is sort of like a baseline foundation that is something you can control. But I'd love to hear your perspective about it from a leadership.
Yeah. And I'll share a quick story in my working with a leadership coach. I've now worked with a leadership coach for like 7 to 8 years, and it's been really monumental shift in the way that I operate as a leader. And one of the times I remember this very clearly, there's early on in my journey, I was really it wasn't even overthinking. It was like over obsessing over how I was being perceived. And if I was saying one thing, what people were thinking, what some of the negative comments that came up, like about me, about the work that we were doing, I was really sitting in that a lot. And in working with my leadership coach over a few sessions, we really unpack that. And what that, let's think of, let's just say 100 people. Let's just say there's 100 people and like 3 of them are sitting in this negative space. And that's always going to be there. There's always going to be naysayers. It's very natural, as a natural part of life. But I was really narrowing in on that 3%, that 3 or 5%. And what I needed to do and what my leadership coach at the time tasked me with was, okay, go talk to people within the 97%. Go talk to them. How are they? Ask them 3 questions. Like, how are they understanding whatever it is we were focusing on at the time? What would they say are your 3 core values? Like, not things that you said, I value this. What would they say are things that you value? And then ask them how they're experiencing some of the things that are happening. And just having those conversations with the 97%, 98, the positive, like where most people are living is in this positive space. One, just retrain my mind to think, okay, you can focus on this. Not that you're not focusing on the negative, but mentally as a leader, I needed to know that, okay, we can't keep over obsessing in this space, we can't keep living in this like toxic work culture. There are people here that are excited. There are people here that are, ready to make change in a safe way. They're excited about what's coming. And for me, that shift was really uncomfortable for me to do. But because I started to talk to people, because I started to ask people, because I started to get on like the ground level of, let me understand what's actually happening versus what I'm creating in my mind, the story that I'm creating in my mind, this narrative, is I almost like unlearn and relearn. And I am starting to create this new narrative for myself of, okay, people are excited about this work. People are into the work that we are doing. They are ready to get on board to the work, and to make these shifts and make these changes, even though they're scared. We're not saying it's going to be easy, but the more that I was able to unpack my own gaps in that process, the more that I was able, and that was the uncomfortable part, is naming that, well, I am shifting into a role where I'm going to make a lot of, some people, maybe a lot of people, unhappy because we are naturally going to be making changes. And my identity was so stuck in this like people pleasing space. I don't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to really disrupt. And now I'm like by nature having to be this disruptor. So the identity shift for me was I had to name where I was going, and sit in this like uncomfortable space of, okay, it's okay if these things are happening. It's okay if people are uncomfortable. It's okay if people are upset. It's okay if people think X, Y, and Z about me. All of those things are part of the process. What I need to focus on is what am I doing? Like, what self-reflection work am I doing to transition out of this people-pleasing space and move into this like transformational space? And a lot of the discomfort that we feel as leaders is exactly that, is that we're not willing to make that leap from one, like holding up the mirror and recognizing, oh, this is probably a me problem, right? Like, because people are going to talk about you. People are going to be upset. People are going to be out of fear, out of their own life and lived experiences. But it's the fact that I'm focusing on that. That was me as a leader. That's within my control. And unless you are willing to, again, hold up that mirror, unpack why that's happening, why you're focusing on those things, it's very difficult to transform and grow. Many people are just like, okay, I'm just going to sit here and continue being the person that I am, and just being like, well, they're terrible people. Like that's just them. I'm going to keep doing this. Well, no, let's focus on and unpack why it is that you feel that way as a leader of this organization. And this isn't so much, that's why I say like leadership work is so much identity work, because you have to be able to name the things that you are doing as a leader that impact the work either moving forward or not moving forward. And if you are able to recognize your own both strengths and flaws and areas of growth, then you are constantly moving, changing, adapting. And the more that you do that more frequently, it gets easier. It gets easier as you go through. You're like, oh, yep, this was me, or like, this was me impeding on the work, or this is something that I can grow in. Has to be constant and consistent. Otherwise, if you're expecting the organization to grow without you growing as a leader, that's a misstep there.
Oh my goodness. I love everything you said there. And I feel like there's a lot of crossover in just mindset work, right? Yeah. Where oftentimes with clients, I'm helping them understand that if part of the reason that you're doing XYZ, good or bad habit, is because you have this identity built up around it. And just building more, essentially acknowledging and allowing it to be so that, well, in your case with the negative, the naysayers, like sometimes these naysayers are just in your mind, right? Mm-hmm. And they're usually louder than the 97% that are on board and have lots of nice things to say. And then also, just as humans, our default mode is to focus on the threat, right? And so just acknowledging that that's sort of the mind, the monkey mind, if you will, that you're working with, I think it makes it so much easier for people to see that it's this constant reframe. It's not like you just figure this out and see it for the first time and you're like, okay, great, now I'm good. No, it's a practice. It's implementation on a day-to-day. Yeah. So, what would you say is like a great place to start for someone who's, let's just say, feeling misunderstood or frustrated in a current position of leadership?
I would say start with, I always talk about getting at bats and, getting outside of your comfort zone. But I think if you are just starting, it's important to start safe. Like, you want to let your mind know that when you're engaging in leadership work, like, this is okay. It's going to be it's going to be okay. And it's going to be a place for growth. So I would say start with really understanding what are your strengths. You can ask people, you can do some self-reflection, you can do just Google a strengths assessment online, or you can do any combination of those. Start by, before you dig into and list 25 things that you do wrong or badly or whatever, start with having a really strong sense of, okay, I do all of these things really well, and really build yourself up in that capacity. And also let go of the fact that you have to do everything well. You do not have to do everything well. That's what we have teams for. That's what you have contractors for. That's what you have people, as people, we naturally by default think that we have to do everything well, but you do not. So I think one, let go of that idea that you have to excel in everything. And then two is get really, really clear on what you do well. You should be able to name 3 to 5 strengths that you have. What comes really easy to you? What do you love to do? What do you do well? What are some things that you maybe don't enjoy doing, but you know that if it came down to it, you're the go-to person for that role. So list some of those things out and do some reflecting, do some journaling. Why do you do those things well? Why do you enjoy this? Why do you not enjoy this? But at the end of it, you should be really clear on 3 to 5 things that are your strengths as a leader. And what you then want to do is to get into spaces and places where you are able to practice that. So for example, if one of your strengths that you list is you really ensure that when you're in a team meeting or in a space, you're ensuring that everybody feels like they're heard. You're a really great listener. Okay, so get into spaces where you are very cognizant and aware that you are turning that on. You are in a team meeting, maybe there's 10 people. You're going to intentionally embed into the agenda moments where you are listening to people and then reflecting on that. Did that feel good? Did you feel like you were successful? What do you think that you can improve on? And what you are, again, practicing here is you are practicing this idea of continuous improvement in something that you already feel like you are strong in. So when you start to get into those things that you are not so good in, or that absolutely terrifies you, you've already done so much practice in the beginning to say, okay, I actually feel like I'm doing this well and I'm practicing something that I already do well. Now you can start to, down the road, step into things that you don't feel so confident in, and it doesn't feel so scary.
Brilliant. Love it. So how can people work with you if they're feeling called, and what's the best way to connect?
Yeah, you can find me on, you can, look us up, Instagram, TikTok, but also just our website. All of it is Be a Little Bold. That's our website, and we can either work together in one of 2 ways. So 2 ways right now. One is a one-on-one capacity. So that's executive leadership coaching, either in a 3 to 6 month time frame. And that is a very personalized approach. We are developing your capacity as a leader. Many times, I'm working with founders that have their own businesses, but also it's not closed off to women that are in a traditional 9-to-5 space, that also are leading within, some sort of a corporate role. And a lot of times people come to me this is my performance review and it says leadership, and there's nobody to help me develop my leadership capacity. And that's what that looks like. And the other form is through this monthly membership, which is everything that I talked about on this episode, building those at-bats, getting that practice in. And it's a space for you to both grow, but practice growing safely.
Amazing. Beautiful website, by the way. Love it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, it's been such a pleasure, Barbara. I really appreciate your time and your wisdom. And I look forward to connecting with you in the future.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on here.
After this conversation, Barbara and I were just so excited about the intertwined nature of our 2 expertise that we just were inspired to create a new program to support women in corporate spaces. It is called Elevate and Lead. It involves 8 sessions to embodied and sustainable leadership for women in corporate. It is an 8-month experiential program to develop the capacity of women in leadership. We provide a holistic approach to leadership that supports leaders at the intersection of leadership self-leadership, and optimal wellness. Our method involves 8 live micro-learning experiences in a virtual community, precisely what Barbara was talking about, a safe space to practice and skip the trial and error of decades of becoming a better leader. It also involves an ongoing personal and professional development opportunity and an online community of leaders and other women that are really interested in optimizing their own leadership ways in an embodied and authentic way. Our leadership and self-leadership wellness development program steps into the gap that McKinsey in their 2022 report points out that now companies have a new pipeline problem. Women leaders are leaving their companies at the highest rate we've ever seen and at a much higher rate than male leaders. To put the scale of the problem in perspective, for every woman at the director level who gets promoted to the next level, 2 women directors are choosing to leave their company. We firmly believe that diverse leadership is not just a moral imperative, but a strategic advantage. So we invite you to skip the trial and error and embrace a transformative program that compresses time, accelerates growth, and ensures the rise of a new era of leadership. This first cohort that starts in January of next year, we are inviting women who have been flagged by their superiors or by the leadership in their own company, or really they just have a deep desire to feel more embodied in their leadership, bringing their leadership skills into practice and growing in a safe community. So if any of this speaks to you or someone that you can think of, please check out the website or pass it on. We would be forever grateful. Have a good one.